All right, Chris. So we just finished recording our newest episode of SoCo's most interesting podcast. And as usual, before we jump into the episode, I'd love to hear, what did you find most interesting?
You know, Mark, without giving anything away, I'm going to say I was surprised in triplicate. Okay. It'll make sense when you watch the video, my friends.
Yeah, that some things can triple. Absolutely. And so
how about for you, Mark?
I love numbers. I think if you guys watch these, I just love numbers. And we get into very briefly get into some of the weeds of the numbers and how some things just based on the numbers, they're not changing. They're not making any effect, even though we think that it might. And so we'll see what that looks like in the future as we continue. But as of right now, we're not seeing any changes. And so we'll talk about that.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to SoCo's most interesting podcast. I am with Mark Ditkoff, co-host of SoCo's most interesting podcast. Mark, how you doing today? What's going on, buddy?
Chris, I am spectacular, and I'm very excited about today's topic.
Well, good. So am I. And I don't think I said my last name, Chris Bongiorno.
There it is.
Maybe I just said Chris. I don't know. Hey, Mark, before we get started, we are recording today at the end of November 2023. And I just want to throw out there that interest rates are at 2-month lows, that this is kind of the third time is the charm. We've seen rates wiggle and wobble a little bit, but we're down near 2-month lows. And there's even some talk now that possibly in March, the Federal Reserve may be looking to actually do a rate cut. So just throwing that bug in everybody's ear. Keep an eye on the markets right now. We should see some things changing one way or the other here in the next couple of months. On to bigger and better things. Mark, what are we talking about today, buddy?
Because I think it's time that we have a little bit of an update on a video we recorded a couple of months ago now about the boogeyman, the elephant in the room, and that is this commissions lawsuit that is occurring in the real estate industry. And so I think we've had some things that have happened over the last few weeks. So let's talk about that.
And Mark, why don't you give us just a little bit of a history recap of where this lawsuit started from, when it kind of originated, and like bring us up to speed of where it sits today and when we're going to, what is going to be coming up in the foreseeable future.
Sure. So a little while ago, it all kind of started where some fancy attorneys got together with a whole bunch of sellers and they said, hey, did you guys know that the commission you pay to your listing agent is now also getting paid to the buyer's agent? And I, as Mr. Attorney, feel like that's not something you should be obligated to do. You shouldn't have to pay the agent that is actively negotiating against you in the deal. Let's all get together, do a class action lawsuit, and let's sue the National Association of Realtors and all the major brands in real estate, whether it's, Keller Williams, Remax, Anywhere, and there's a bunch of other big named companies in there. And so that's what they did.
And this wasn't through a government agency. This isn't through Department of Justice. This is a private civil action. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. Yeah. And so it actually started a few years ago. The Department of Justice did step in about disclosing the buyer agent compensation, because that normally wasn't disclosed to the public. How much is the buyer agent getting paid? And so the Department of Justice did step in about maybe a year or so ago. And that is now, you'll find that on Zillow and third-party websites that are public, is what is the buyer agent compensation. But this class action lawsuit is the one that we're going to be talking about, was the one that actually occurred specifically in Missouri, because that's the one that's already gone through and has the jury's already decided a verdict on that one. They did it, I believe it was like November 2nd is when they came out with their verdict on that.
Okay. And what was really the bone of contention really was that it's felt like the sellers shouldn't be required to pay the buyer's agent's commission. Do I understand that correctly?
That's exactly correct. And so historically, in order to list a property on any realtor multiple listing service, there had to be some offer of compensation from the listing agent to the buyer agent. it could have been a dollar, but there had to be something. The listing agent had to be paying something to the buyer's agent just in order for it to be allowed to be put on the multiple listing service. And which, since the seller is paying the listing agent, the attorneys here said, well, seller, you're actually the one now paying the buyer agent, since it's your money going to the listing agent and then being forced to go into the buyer agent pocket.
So, Mark, since this came out on November 2nd, I'm sure it's just been utter chaos and everything is falling apart in the real estate industry because of this cataclysmic decision in favor of the plaintiffs. Can you give us some context of where the lawsuit stands, where it's going, and then what the end result as we see it today kind of is?
Yeah, so a couple of the large companies settled a few months ago for like $180 million. So they're not really involved at this point. I think it was $140 million maybe. But in Missouri, so what happened a couple of weeks ago is the jury decided that the sellers were damaged by the real estate. They were assuming it's kind of like inflating commission prices by being forced to pay the other side as well. And that the remaining National Association of Realtors, which is NAR, Keller Williams, which is the largest real estate brokerage in the world, and then Anywhere, which is an umbrella company for multiple real estate companies, they were liable of damages upwards of about $1.8 billion.
Wow.
And then I guess because of the type of lawsuit it is, the judge has the opportunity to immediately triple that number in damages. And therefore, those three companies would be liable for about over $5 billion in damages to the sellers in Missouri during whatever it is time that they had set.
And these are the folks that did not settle, correct? So you've got one group who settled individually, and then this group, which includes NAR, that went through the jury determination of damages, and now the judge has the ability to triple that. And the judge hasn't ruled on that yet, Mark?
You know what? I actually tried to look it up this morning. I haven't seen anything official on it, but based on the conversations I've had, the expectation is they do, that they will triple it because they have that ability.
Gotcha.
The defendants have already gone through and appealed at least that part of it, saying, look, that's way too much money. It's ridiculous. If we still lose this, it needs to be a lower amount. They've also gone through and
so
all
they've
three
appealed that, correct?
I don't know what the official appeal process looks like, but they've kind of come out and openly said that's unacceptable
that go that
as an
route.
Amount. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And all three of them have said they're actually going to go through and appeal the whole decision as well. There was some evidence that the defendants feel wasn't allowed to be shown to the jury, which includes the statistics that show over the last 100 years that clear cooperation and the requirement of compensation to the buyer agent has actually been a benefit to all sellers in regards to getting their home sold for more money because there's more people looking at all that. The jury wasn't allowed to see some of that evidence. And so in their opinion, the defendants, they want to appeal and make sure that gets shown.
How long are they talking about for these appeals, Mark?
Oh man, it's going to take years. It's going to take years. I mean, nothing's going to happen quickly, which is also why, and you kind of jokingly at the beginning of this video said like, oh, the whole industry is falling apart and it's cataclysmic, right? Literally, it's going to take years before anything actually settles here. And so the immediate effect on this hasn't really hit, other than it's a really big topic of conversation that people like talking about, like bringing up, and like making wild accusations about. But there's really, my guess is 3, 4, 5 years before anything comes out of this.
So that's interesting. You said that people like to talk about it and that they've got these kind of crazy potential outcomes. What are some of that? So I want to, two-part question. What's some of the craziness that you've heard, just anecdotically? Probably said that wrong. It's early. And secondly, what do you think legitimately, in your experience, again, might be some of the real fallout over this between now and whenever this finalizes in the next several years? So start out with what's some of the crazy stuff that you've heard.
So if the judge triples it and it somehow goes through, all appeals are lost, right? 5 point whatever billion dollars is crippling. And it's a good chance basically all of the major defendants in this would have to close up shop, right? Declare bankruptcy because they don't have the money to pay 5 point whatever billion dollars in damages in just Missouri, right? Because if that happens, now it's going to go to other states and it's going to be cataclysmic. And so that could be detrimental to the industry in total, right? I mean, if you see Keller Williams and Century 21 and all those ones, right, just gone, right? They cannot exist anymore, or whatever capacity that looks like. In order just to appeal the process, typical appeals, and again, I don't know if this one's going to be different in Missouri, but a typical appeal, after talking to an attorney friend of mine, costs 10% just as a bond. And so at a $1.8 billion original verdict, that's $180 million per defendant they'd have to put up as bond just to do the appeal process with no guarantee of any beneficial outcome, right? That in itself is crippling. So a lot of people expect that there's going to be some sort of settlement like the earlier companies did even before this verdict came out. Gary Keller, who's the owner of Keller Williams, he is the Keller in Keller Williams, has said, on my gravestone, I want the word realtor to be written there, and I will lose every dollar I have, and I will die fighting on this hill for this industry. And so he is a billionaire, and he's going to put up every dollar he has, at least he says he will, in order to defend this, because he feels like it is an unjust verdict and is not worth just giving up on and settling on. And so we'll see if that actually comes to play, right? I mean, everybody's got big hitters until push comes to shove, and sometimes decisions change, right? And so, but sure, that's an expectation that people have right now, is that that's why it's going to take so long, is because nobody's planning on settling at this point.
So do you see any short-term impact to the way buyers buy and sellers sell here, let's say in the next, 12 to 36 months? Is there anything that you see on the horizon that's going to be, earth-shattering, shaking, where it's going to kind of create some upheaval in the industry?
I think that this, as a topic of conversation, is going to have a lot more people that are looking to sell their home asking the questions of, do I need you as my listing agent to compensate the buyer's agent, right? I mean, there's this whole thing about it. Why can't I just pay you half the amount I would normally pay, and they can figure it out on their end, right? And so listing agents are going to have to be well versed in how to tackle that, and how to make sure that it's understood the benefits to offering a cooperating compensation. And if they don't, we'll see more and more listings come on the market that are minimum, if not zero, compensation to the buyer's agent, which at that point, then the buyer's agents need to be ready to have that conversation with their buyers that says, look, my compensation isn't guaranteed anymore, and so I need to talk to you about what happens in that case. Are you willing to pay that? Are we going to build it into the financing? What are we going to do with that, right? And so I do expect there to be a little bit of an increase in the number of listings that do it. I actually looked this morning, I took the 25 newest listings on our market, and I looked at all the compensation that's being offered there. Because this is a conversation, I'm expecting sellers having this conversation with their agents. So I said, let's go to the newest listings we've seen, and what are they offering, right? And I thought there could be a decrease in what we see as normal, right? And so there's no standard commission, but a lot of the times in the Southern Colorado market, we're seeing between 2.5% and 3% as a cooperating agent's compensation. That's just kind of an average if you look at it. And so we had two of them that were actually offering flat rates. But those flat rates actually averaged at, one of them was 7% flat rate, but that's because it was a $7,000 piece of land. And so it's offering $500. And so that's technically a 7%. Another one was offering a flat $9,000, which equated to about 2.1% of their list price. And so that's the bookends of the data from those 25 listings.
And what kind of listings, Mark?
That's a good question. So the $7,000 listing with a $500 flat fee was a small piece of land in a rural area. Okay. The $9,000 listing is a home in town. And so it equates to about 2.1%. So that's, take that for what you want, but it's just a regular home that typically would offer a percentage, but instead they said, no, this is the dollar figure I'm willing to offer. Okay. And so you take the other 23 listings, because I kind of threw those are our bookends, right? From 2.1% up to 7%. And the other 23 listings average right at 2.85%. When you add them up and divide by how many there are, right? And so the median is actually 3%. And so there's more 3% ones than anything else. And the average is 2.85%. So we haven't seen any change yet, at least based on this very small sample size, right? 25 listings. And this is something I'm going to kind of keep an eye on just to see if we start seeing a trend in it slowly decreasing, right? Maybe next month it's 2.7, then 2.5, then 2.1, and then 1.5, right? Or maybe it stays exactly where it is in the interim because no major changes are expected by a lot of people in the industry.
And Mark, I just want to make sure I understand this, because I know I lose sight of this. So if I'm losing sight of it, I think other people do too. It makes it optional to pay the buyer's commission or part of it, where previously it was a requirement to get the listing on the MLS system, correct? Am I understanding that correctly? Because if I remember what you said at the beginning, in order to get my listing on the NAR MLS system, I needed to pay at least $1 to the buyer's agent. At least $1. Didn't say 3%, didn't say 6%, but something. And now it makes that optional. Is that correct?
So that's the goal of this verdict, right? And so in our local associations here, we haven't seen that rule come by yet. I think there is still a minimum compensation, a dollar compensation, whatever that's required in order to put it on the MLS. But I fully expect basically every MLS across the board, because of this lawsuit, to change that. Because again, we're only changing it by $1. Right? If there's actually value in offering that buyer agent compensation, there should be no minimum, because the value is there to do it. And so it should be allowed to say, no, I don't want to do it at all. And then they'll see why that's not a good idea. If at the end it isn't a good idea. But if it ends up that people are allowed to do zero, they start doing zero, and we see houses sell like normal, people are saving money now. And so that's an opportunity for them. So we just need to see what that data looks like. But yeah, that's the expectation, is that it's going to become optional. It's going to go from $1 to $0 as a minimum. I can't wait for it to go negative, right? If you buy this house, your buyer agent has to pay me. Let's do that round of things, right? And so, but no, that's the expectation, is that it's just going to become optional, and sellers are then, the big thing is disclosure, right? I guess a lot of this started out as the fact that a lot of sellers were paying their listing agent and didn't know the listing agent was then going and paying the buyer agent. At the same time,
know, but they didn't know specifics.
Yeah, they didn't know how much or whatever it is. Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, that's a fee the listing agent's optionally paying. Do they care if they pay me as a listing agent and then I go pay my car bill? Right. Pay my like, that's also just a fee that I associate with my business. And so that's what some people are but I do get it. Again, it's the person on the other side of the table that they're technically compensating. And so disclosure, right? Colorado apparently is ahead of the game on this. In our listing agreement, it very straightforward outlines how much is the total commission and how much of that am I going to be paying to the buyer's agent on the other side. And so it's hard for a seller here to say, I didn't know, and I didn't know how much, because they signed a document that shows exactly what that is.
And Mark, neither one of us are attorneys, and neither one of us is where this is our area of expertise. And maybe, we can look at bringing on a guest here in the next couple of weeks after the first of the year that might be an attorney or someone that's the subject matter expert. That might be really interesting. But at least from my standpoint, and I think you would agree, we really don't, until this gets through the appeal process and things get narrowed down and hammered out, there may be minor changes here or there, like you said, maybe a minor rule change on our MLS, but we're really not expecting on the lending side or the real estate side, like kind of these big shifts in how business is done. Would you agree with that, with where we are today?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, again, this is a huge conversation that's not going to lead to a whole lot of action and a whole lot of changes in the actual day-to-day practice of what we do. I've been wrong before. I might be wrong here, but that's my expectation. And most people I talk to, that's the expectation as well, is that it's popular now. So people are doing things now because it's popular. But again, all this time, you always could have listed it for $1 compensation, and it didn't happen. And there was a reason it didn't happen. Here's the same thing, is now it's going to be zero. I'm not foreseeing any major changes, but we'll just have to kind of pay attention and see what happens.
Yeah, and I think the major changes are more going to be on the settlement side or the, penalty side with these large real estate companies, which we're not going to have answers to for several years, it sounds like. Mark, I appreciate you taking the time to do all this research, man, and be up to date on it.
Yeah, again, it's a big conversation, and I like being well-versed in what's going on. Again, I don't have all the answers, and I don't know all the intricacies of how it works, but I have a general knowledge to the point where I can at least have the conversation.
Right.
Because I'm interested. Because again, if somehow this $5 billion actually goes through, and that's an expectation and that they have to pay it, then our industry is going to change, and it's going to change very quickly once that goes through, because there's just no way it just can't happen that way. People can't afford it.
Sure. Mark, how can people reach you if they've got follow-up questions for you?
Yeah, so we're on all the major social media platforms at Onyx Home Group. That's Onyx with a Y. And so, Chris, where are they going to find you?
In the comments down below, it's easiest to find me there and get a hold of me for any follow up questions. I really want to encourage everyone, if you could like and subscribe. We're trying to get up to 1 million subscribers by the end of 2023.
It's true.
Right, Mark? 1 million?
That's our loft goal or whatever it's called.
Right, right. No, but we would appreciate any support. And if you guys got any comments about future topics, things you're interested in within real estate lending or outside of that, we would be most appreciative, whatever feedback you can give us. Right, Mark?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, that is this week's SoCo's Most Interesting Podcast. Again, Mark, appreciate your time and making us all a bit smarter with your input.
Awesome, sir. Thank you. It was fun.
All right. We'll see y'all next time.